He's been an extremely strong supporter of space programs for a long time. We're very fortunate to have this individual in the White House and supporting our efforts. There are a few other things I'm trying to think. Well, at this point, Congressman, please come to the stage. I gotta figure out how to start running on Teams. There we go.
I gotta figure out what this is. Is this the Earth or is this Mars?
If that's the Earth, we're in trouble. Maybe that's the Earth in about 5,000
maybe
years.
it's the moon.
Yes, it's the moon. John, this is the moon, correct? Thank you.
Or it could be the Earth, and I could say.
It can go into orbit.
Oh, there you go. All right. Or we could say that this is the Earth, and then they could have my quote. I told you to watch out for those asteroids.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll be having a presentation from Ohio University at 9:30 following Congressman Rohrabacher. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Yeah, so welcome to, how many of you do not come from California? Ooh, okay. Well, let me apologize right off the bat then. As a Californian, we're so sorry that the weather has been so bad for you. And, I used to work for Ronald Reagan, and we were all proud Californians. And Reagan would always note when the weather was so horrible out in Washington, and he'd tell everybody, he'd say, out in California, we know that had the Pilgrims landed there in California instead of on Plymouth Rock, that the East Coast would still be uninhabited. So keep that in mind. Again, I want to welcome you to California, and you hear a lot of bad things and good things about our state. We are an innovative people in California, and some people think of us as being a little nutty, but that's all right. There's a new sign on the border, I understand, someone put up, on the border of Arizona, leaving California, resume normal behavior. So, we have, of course, that famous Woody Allen quote, which is, the only thing California ever contributed to our culture is the ability to turn right on red. And, well, no, we have done a lot more. I will tell you that in my district, and which is up in Orange County, I am very proud to say that every time anyone comes into my area, that is where the first stage of the Saturn rocket that took the first human being to the moon, that's where it was built, right there. And we have a lot to be proud of in California. So I understand, speaking of the moon, I understand that Buzz Aldrin was with you yesterday, or what was it? Buzz Lighthorn or something? No. Lightyear, is that it? Buzz Lightyear. Yeah, my kids have one of those dolls that we've been watching. That I have a 9-year-old triplets, and so I don't think they know the difference between Buzz Lightyear and Buzz Aldrin, but they will know, and they've met Buzz. So anyway, I just thought we'd talk a little bit about the government and space. I was asked earlier what really got me involved in space and science, because when I was elected to Congress, I immediately opted for the Science Committee and stuck with it all these years while other people were going on to the committees dealing with taxation, Ways and Means, very powerful, raise a lot of contributions on that, or energy and commerce for regulatory issues, and of course appropriations. I stuck with the Science Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee, because I felt that there's where ideas were being decided and looked at and debated that would truly impact the future of the human race. And I think that one thing that I have learned in my 24 years in Congress, now my 25th year, we were just talking about how Senator Specter had done such a wonderful job, and he was a solid guy, and the voters then voted him out. And so what we have learned, of course, when you are in public office, just as in science, you learn that the fastest drying liquid known in the universe are tears of gratitude. So, but what I'd like to start off with today is to let you know that gratitude is really what I have found to be one of the most important components of the universe. Gratitude, our founding fathers had it right. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that belongs to the right of all human beings, every person on this planet. But you cannot be happy. People who are not grateful are not happy people. And the fundamental component to happiness is gratitude. And those who are not grateful for their health may soon find that that's what they should be the most grateful for. Or those people who enjoy freedom in their society. Once freedom is missing, then all of a sudden people realize how important it was. Ronald Reagan used to say that freedom is like the air. You just take it for granted that you're breathing, but you deny freedom or you deny someone air for a very short period of time, and they realize that that is really an important component to their surroundings. So what we have to do is take a look at how we are going to progress, and gratitude has something to do with it. Because, and I will put it to you this way, people, just like the air and just like freedom, take for granted what our investment in space technology has done for them, for their families, and for the human race. They just take these things for granted now. When I was younger, my father my father and mother both came from dirt poor farms in North Dakota. And it is the most miserable life on a small farm in North Dakota. My dad joined the Marine Corps in order to fight World War II. And the life in the Marine Corps during World War II was actually an easier life than it was for him to be on the farm. So he stayed in the Marine Corps, if you can imagine. Well, he was a pilot. And that's one of the things, of course, that have always sparked my interest. But my father understood that technology was what would uplift humankind because they were poor and they grew up poor. And when my dad lived in different areas of the country, and we would call up our grandparents. His parents were in communication about once a month maybe with us. And at that time, you're placing a telephone call, and the call goes like this. Hello, Grandma. And that's what it sounded like. And you were going through 7 operators. Every one of the operators was upset with you for bothering them while they wanted to have their coffee break. And it was not a good, and it cost a fortune, $5 to call back to North Dakota. Well, nowadays, what? It's perfectly clear. You can call almost anywhere in the world for $5, actually probably $1. And guess what? That has brought more happiness to families, to people to be able to keep in touch with their loved ones. And that is something that's totally taken for granted. No one realizes it's all based on a space-based asset. Space-based assets have changed our lives, yet people don't necessarily understand how, and thus are not grateful for it. We just saw that we had this horrible tornado in Oklahoma. Well, the people in Oklahoma had about 15 minutes notice. Now, we're hopefully in the future they'll have more notice than that. But they had more notice because we have space-based assets that are tracking these formations. When I was young and visited my family in North Dakota, there was a storm, and it was a dark night, and we tried to turn on the radio, and we heard there were tornadoes, and it was dark, and you couldn't see it. We crawled into a cellar that was dug out of the ground underneath the floorboards of the house and spent the night there. Well, we don't need to spend the nights in the cellar anymore, but we do know we will have 15 minutes notice, and I predict in the future we should be able to understand with our computerization and our understanding of weather that we should be able to understand where those tornadoes will actually come down, perhaps hours in advance of a tornado landing. We have, of course, I don't have to tell you, I don't have it on me now, but I have this telephone, with GPS in it. GPS, how could we function without GPS today? Space-based assets have uplifted humankind and will continue to do so. I mean, television today, entertainment today, communications today, all of this traced back to an enterprise beyond our imagination of knowing where to plant and where not to plant. We have vineyards now in California that were, and all around the world I might add, where they have done surveys from space to find out where is exactly the right place to grow the grapes for the wine. Now, of course, that's something I am very grateful for. And I have done my best to show my gratitude by chipping in as much as I can for that. But the bottom line is that humankind will continue to progress, but only if they are grateful for what we are getting out of space, because space is the natural next level of humankind. And it's up to us who are aware of that and are conscious of that to argue that case and to make sure we remind our fellow Americans and fellow human beings of the importance of investing in space, but also paying attention to it in a way to make our space efforts much more effective. And I really believe that, what is eventually going to happen, we will have settlements on planets, just like Elon Musk was visiting us the other day in the California Society and talked about how he wants to build a settlement on Mars. And I believe that unless we totally destroy the economy in Washington, which we've been trying to do now for a while, unless we do that and unless we get so many bureaucrats in the way that the folks like Elon Musk and others can't do their job, that we will, in my lifetime, if we don't get in their way and don't tax away all their money and don't control all of their creative behavior, we will have at least a landing of humankind on Mars, but perhaps even a settlement. So, but if it's not in my lifetime, it will happen in my children's lifetime. And as we move forward, we will have many heroes and many villains, and it's up to us to determine who the villains are. And let me just note that the villains are not just the guys who are anti-space. The villains are also the people who want to insist on maintaining the status quo of the current space program. Because if we are going to conquer the new worlds, if we are going to offer the new technologies, if we are going to lift mankind, it's not going to be based on the status quo, no matter how proud we are of what's already been accomplished. It's got to be based on changing the right way of how we're doing it now, which might have been the most wonderful way of doing it in the past. And the space shuttle perhaps is a good example of that. I was always someone who pointed out the cost of the space shuttle. And the space shuttle was an amazing piece of technology. And every time it went up, I think it was about $1 billion without payload. And that means that what I said, that was the most efficient means ever devised of burning federal tax dollars. And we saw that big plume underneath the shuttle. Well, no, but we needed the shuttle for the space station and things such as that. But we do not need to spend money now to redevelop the capability of the space shuttle. What we need to do is be creative so that instead of relying on one system, that large numbers of entrepreneurs can be engaged in space activity. And there's a big debate now, of course, whether or not we should be building the SLS, which in the end will cost as much, if not more, than the space shuttle. And I would just suggest that I call it the SLS Titanic, because it's so huge, and one error with that will be so costly that it will defund almost all of the science projects that we have in mind for space. We can't let ourselves get caught in that trap. I mean, we are ending up putting all the money into a transportation system, and then we're defunding all the things that we expect that it might want to transport. That makes no sense at all. So how do we do this? Well, we need to be creative. We need to keep costs down. We need to bring in international cooperation. We need to make sure that the private sector invests and is involved in this. For example, I am deeply involved, as you know, in advocating the idea that instead of having one big SLS, that let us have a space refueling station that they can then utilize the rocket systems that we already have spent money developing, the tens of billions of dollars that went into developing Atlas and Delta rockets and other rockets. We've already got those. Let's reconfigure them in a way that so once they're up there, they can refuel. And that seems, and by the way, it's very possible a private sector company might want to be a refueler. Now, I know that's hard for some people to imagine. It's not hard for me to imagine when I go and visit companies like SpaceX. And, you know, you can there, and Bigelow. I mean, I visited the Bigelow plant, and here, years ago, he realized transporting big heavy metal into space may not be the most cost-effective way of having a habitat in space, considering that I think it costs $10,000 a pound to transport anything into space. So what did he do? He came up with this Kevlar hard shell concept that's an inflatable, and but you know, I don't think the bureaucracy, our space bureaucracy, has not you know, wrapped their arms around Bigelow. They've sort of kept him like that. And same with a lot of the other innovators in space are being kept away by our bureaucracy, who are interested in the status quo for the most important reason of all, because they want to stick it out until they get their retirement, and they don't want any change that's going to threaten that, for Pete's sakes. Well, that's not the way we're going to do things in the future and get to the future that we want. And I know there's some people that cannot handle the idea that the private sector can do things and should do things that are being done today by government. My theory is whatever this private sector can do should be done by the private sector. Those things that it can't do, that's what should be done by government. For example, when our country was first founded, it was very clear that the government was the only entity that could deliver mail from one part of the colonies to the other. We have a huge bureaucratic operation that's going billions and billions of dollars in debt every year, taking money from science programs in order to maintain a behemoth delivery system for mail. Now, I'm sorry, but now with United Parcel Service and Federal Express and all the rest and the internet, we can deliver the mail by the private sector, and it won't cost the federal government money. In fact, they'll be paying taxes, and all of that extra revenue that I'm talking about, just imagine that going into science programs, of what that would do. We are struggling now to finance very important, significant science programs that will change the way of life of our people, but yet we have to instead channel money into a useless bureaucracy because they're there and they're an entity in the status quo. So I guess the message today is we've got to find ways of overcoming the status quo, and that is much more difficult to overcome that type of bureaucratic governmental mentality in the status quo. It's much more difficult to overcome that than it is, as we were reminded by Wernher von Braun, than it is to overcome gravity. Gravity is a cinch, bureaucracy is not. Bureaucracy is the most effective way of turning pure energy into solid waste. And that's what it is. When you channel billions of dollars into delivering packages that doesn't have to be there, that could go to science programs, you are doing a disservice, and that's exactly what I mean by pure energy into solid waste. So we have some ideas, as I mentioned. If we are going to have a vibrant program, part of that is, of course, as I mentioned, bringing in the private sector, bringing them in for investment. The other part is also cooperation with other countries. There are some things government has to do. I think we have to, at least to get to the point where we are responsible for, and I'm not saying the government employees have to do it, we might want to give a contract out for this, but we might not. We might want to keep it part of a controlled system. But what about the idea of space debris and the cleanup of space debris? We need to make that an international effort. The United States can no longer carry the burden of all of humankind uplifting us on the American taxpayer dollars. We can't do that anymore. So, I mean, when the Russians were our adversary, we had cooperation with them, and now hopefully the Russians. By the way, I'm on my way to Moscow Monday, and one of the things I'm doing is going to go visit Star City and going to talk about debris cleanup and about cooperative efforts in space. And they're our former enemies, and now they should be looked at as our best possible friends if we work out in the right way and reach out to them. Unfortunately, we've been pushing them away. There's a lot of Cold War mentality still around where they look at the Russians as the enemy. The Russians are not our enemy. And we should they have wonderful investments in space, and we should all be pooling our resources to do things like we're doing at the space station, but also in clearing debris. If we don't clear the debris, when I talked about space-based assets, they're all in jeopardy. All of them are in jeopardy, and certainly any new projects that you want to put into space are in jeopardy. So we need to work on that. The way we can afford it, again, is bringing cooperation in from the private sector and also from cooperation with other countries. So with that, I don't know where I'm leading here. I've got a couple other notes to myself to remind you of things that we need. I want to emphasize that the International Space Station has given us the ability to what? To build things in space, to build, structures. We can do that now. So what we need to do is perhaps, and again, the private sector and with cooperation, we can do things like the refueling station, but what else do we need for humankind? We need energy, and we need energy for use in space. 20 years ago, felt that the idea of beaming energy from space, maybe into space for transportation purposes, or maybe down to Earth for our utilization for our energy needs, was a good idea. I think that right now, maybe there'll be some private sector companies, if we can actually get down the price of building things in space, that we might invest in something that would permit us to, for example, produce energy in gas-producing and oil-producing countries where, quite often, they flare their gas and have been flaring it for decades. This is incredible energy, valuable. They're flaring it because they can't get it out to market. Well, what about market where if they would produce some type of energy beam, either microwave or laser, that could in some way bounce that off of an object in space and deliver it to a country that needed electricity? How about that? How about the fact that in some countries they can't afford to build big electric plants? They're in the middle of a developing area like Africa or South America or whatever, maybe even in the United States or someplace, Wyoming or whatever. The fact is we can build receivers, and it's a lot less complicated to build a receiver of some sort of microwave or laser that would be bounced off a satellite than it would necessarily to build a whole new electric plant based on natural gas or coal or oil, and then making sure you built the pipelines to fuel that electric system. So we have things that we can do, tremendous things we can do, but we have to make sure that that the American people understand how important it is to have space as part of their consciousness and our allocation of young people's time and commitment and resources. And one last element that I'd like to talk about, and you know I've mentioned this quite often, and that is one thing that I don't take for granted is that I am alive and dinosaurs aren't. Right? Okay. That's one thing, you know, it would be a real, a bummer to go out in your backyard and see a Tyrannosaurus Rex coming at you. I understand that. But the fact is, the dinosaurs disappeared, and finally people realized it could have something to do with a large object from space hitting the Earth. Now, the reason that's important is because the dinosaurs were there, it hit the Earth, now there are no dinosaurs. We are here. If something big hits the Earth, we won't be here. All of the development of humankind, all the things we're talking about could disappear. Literally disappear from the planet if you have a huge asteroid that would hit the Earth. And if we don't, right now we are at this time in human development capable of deflecting such an asteroid. If we're ready. If we are ready. If we are not ready, the only thing we can do is pray. But I understand that Elon Musk has a lifeboat that he was going to launch into space. But there'll only be a couple seats on the lifeboat, so I'll see you later. But the point is this: we need to not ignore this great threat to the human beings on this planet. If we do, it could possibly lead to beyond disaster. I mean, just oblivion. It could lead to oblivion. So everyone in the human race should be in some way conscious that working together, we can have a system that will detect any type of object that would be coming from space that could cause enormous damage on the Earth, and a way to deflect that object. Because we have that capability now, we should be planning that out. I've been talking about this for 20 years, and we have made that much progress, that much, when we should be making that much progress. So as we are moving forward, let's make sure that we enlist. One of the things I did, of course, was pass, or when I was a member of the Science Committee, or actually when I was the chairman of the Space Subcommittee, we passed a piece of legislation aimed at getting kids involved with astronomy by giving them a prize for identifying the largest object in space that had not been identified up until then. And we need to make sure that we get people focused on some of these objects in space. And I do support the idea that we're going to be looking into space and having telescopic programs for more than just trying to identify an asteroid, but also for furthering our understanding of the universe. But at the same time as we're understanding the universe, maybe we could make sure that we are also capable of determining objects that could wipe us out as a race on this planet. So with that said, I want to thank all of you, because I'm a former journalist, and that means that I know this much about this much. But I don't know this much about anything. And that's where you come in, and that you are folks that have dedicated your life to the various things that I'm talking about today. You have a much greater depth of knowledge, but we've got to make sure we reach out to those people who don't have that same depth of knowledge, and again, show them why they should be grateful for the fact that people like Wernher von Braun and other good Americans, like Wernher von Braun, and everyone who's been involved in America's space effort, but also throughout the world in their space efforts. That's why we need to be grateful to this hunk of human beings who are going to create a lifeboat for all of us. So thank you all very much. Nice to be with you today. I think I could, if you have one or two questions, I think I could do that, but do you have someone else you want to come up now, or what's the game plan? All right, I'll take one or two questions, and then I'm going to rush out of here and go down. I have this device that it's it utilizes natural power it's a transportation system that uses reusable energy. And it's right down here at La Jolla Shores. They seem to have these waves that come in, and I've got this reusable energy transportation system to take me from the outside onto the shore. And I've got to go down there and check that out. Yes, sir.
I believe that the space has traditionally been an area of bipartisan efforts. And I think that I've seen signs that may be breaking down, that it may be becoming an area of partisan combat. I'm wondering if that perception is correct, and if those things can be done. I mean, it's very valuable that we're not part of bipartisan combat.
I don't think it is correct. I don't think it is correct.
Oh, good.
In analyzing Washington, you have to remember this. Honest people can disagree philosophically on what direction and what they think government should do. Honest people can have that disagreement. And as you can tell, I'm a conservative Republican when it comes to private sector versus public sector, et cetera. But there's interesting to find out that the people who are fighting the effort in the beginning of this administration, which has to be one of the most liberal administrations I've ever seen, they were pushing for what I thought was the right direction for the space program. And I actually was supportive of their efforts in the very beginning and for that first year and a half or so. And some of my Republicans, and they were going exactly in the direction that we should be going in, and my fellow Republicans were opposing it. So here I was in the middle of all of this. It really isn't, but it wasn't for political reasons. It's just, for example, the Republicans that were opposing some of the efforts of the president early on would now represent Texas. And they aren't going to, Texas has NASA workforce issues. And so it has more to do with the nature of protecting one's assets, manufacturing and government assets in their area than it has to do with partisan politics. And I haven't seen, in fact, I haven't seen any partisan politics there. Yes, sir.
You brought up the problems, basically, of financing space development. You know, our nation's in an economic breakdown, so is the world. The question I have is the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government is giving $86 billion as a baseline every month to bail out Wall Street's bad investment. So my question for you is, when are you going to support
I voted against that.
Right. When are you going to support H.R. 129 to restore Glass-Steagall, to separate Wall Street's bad investments from the nation's debt so that we can stop bleeding the country?
Well, first of all, I think bailing out, I don't know exactly what that bill does, but I will say that when we bailed out the banks, that was the worst thing we could have ever done. We should let them all go broke, and we would have bounced back by now, but that's my philosophy. You have a lot of liberal economists who disagree with that, and when you start having government bailouts, you're going to have interest groups trying to bribe members of government with campaign contributions, etc. We should have just let it go down. And by the way, the credit unions could have picked up almost all of these people. And I'm a big credit union. Some people on my side of the aisle mistakenly believe that free enterprise means profit motive all the time. Free enterprise to me means freedom, and freedom to cooperate through credit unions, through, for example, I told you my dad was a farmer in North Dakota. Well, they have a thing called farmer cooperatives up there, so they can afford to work together, so they don't, everyone doesn't have to buy the same tractors, thrashing machines. That type of cooperative spirit is totally is consistent with the type of free enterprise system that our founding fathers had in mind. They didn't have in mind that we were going to have companies that couldn't go broke. And they didn't have in mind that people like Goldman Sachs, one of the worst wheeler-dealer groups on Wall Street, people putting $1 million bonuses in their pocket for transferring chunks of paper and never developing anything usable to mankind, that they would be declared a bank and being bailed out. So, anyway, that's off subject here.
Well, H.R. 129, the Glass-Steagall bill, does do that. It says that...
Well, I'll take a look.
Yeah, please do. It has 64
we're off subject here. I don't think people came here to hear a speech on the bailouts, but...
Nice to see you again, Congressman. When you're going to Moscow next week, might I respectfully suggest that when you're talking about space junk with the Russians,
yes,
the governments, the US, the Europeans, and the Russians do need to move this stuff. But it actually costs more to drop it in the ocean than it is to park it in a junk orbit. And if you can park it in a junk orbit and get paid for that as a private company, you also have the salvage value at $10,000 a pound of aviation-grade aluminum.
You know what? Can I ask you to repeat the first point you made? Because I literally have surfer's ear.
Okay.
I don't know if you know what that is. When you get in the water and it's cold, you grow things in your ear and you can't hear as well.
Talking about space junk with the Russians.
Yes.
Everybody wants to drop the junk into the ocean. It costs more to drop it in the ocean than it does to park it in a junk orbit. And then you've got salvage, but we need to sort
I see.
out
So
the
what you're
salvage
suggesting,
issue.
instead of destroying space junk, that we corral it.
It's worth about $50 billion at current market value.
Okay, that's a very fascinating idea. And you know what? It was worth me coming down here just to hear that idea. And
Well, I'm just respectfully suggesting that it might be
it's
something
great. That's a great
consider.
idea. And I'll tell you something. Early on, I remember I was trying to get NASA, when the space shuttle was going up, to take the fuel tube there and leave it on board for an extra 2 minutes, and then we would have it there, just in case. I was the chairman of the subcommittee on space, and I couldn't get them to do it. I mean, even I was the chairman, and it was amazing, because I said to myself, look, that could be an asset someday, and especially right now when we're talking about refueling, who knows what we could have used those, or at least maybe 5 or 6 of them maybe, But instead, no, they shined me on, spent more money, of course, spent a lot more money by trying to keep them here on Earth rather than to let them float up there for a while. Thank you very much. I will, if you have a paper on corralling space junk and how that might be a valuable resource, I'd love to see it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I have time for one more or two more. There's two guys in line, then we'll go. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Rohrabacher. On the subject of space-based assets, I feel that the issue of space junk is really just the opposite extreme of the issue of asteroid impacts. What I really worry about bringing the International Space Station down is the same kind of thing that cost us Skylab. What are the chances we're going to have another sequester show long about the time we need to fund the International Space Station in, say, 4 to 6 years?
I don't know, because I will say this, that just so you'll understand sequester, I mean, it's really easy to say sequester as if it's something you don't want. If our currency disintegrates, none of this will be possible. So, I mean, you can't go into debt $1 trillion a year, every year. You cannot do that every year and expect that your currency will live for an extra 5 years. It won't happen. So the sequester is the way of preventing. Now, it may not be the best way. There may be lots of other things. I'd like to cut the post office, for example, and cut that off and do things like that. But the only thing that could get through the way our government is structured in how we elect our officials and et cetera, that was the only way we could get spending down. And we did bring the level of deficit spending went from $1.5 trillion to something like 700 billion, which is still beyond imagination this year. So you got to understand when you're saying sequester it's not something that's just being done frivolously. It's being done because it was the only choice. In terms of your question, what can we do to make sure that we have the funds to make sure that what happened to Skylab doesn't happen to Space Station? I think that's a major project, and I just think it's something that we need to be planning on right now. I have not seen the plans. Are there plans for this right now? Okay, because I don't know if the plan is in place. Well, we're going to do this and then we're going to bring it down, or whether it's like the gentleman before you had to say, was suggesting that we do have an area of space where we could just corral all the things that we're not using and leave it there for future utilization. So I hope that answered your question, but it's about as far and close as I could come.
Thank you.
Right.
Okay. And concerning space junk, there's a man named Joe Carroll. I was at his presentation yesterday. He talked about taking the materials from the space debris and manufacturing it for space purposes like space shields and space equipment, fuel tanks. Do you ever consider his idea? I don't have any of his literature.
Well, you know what? I'm very interested in this concept. So, thank you. One last question, and then I better get going.
When is Congress going to charter a space power corporation as they chartered ComSat Corporation about 60 years ago?
And now, what you're chartering what corporations versus who again?
A space solar power corporation.
That'd be great.
To go and build a space power system.
Well, you know what? If it's a matter of money, then it's going to be it's going to take a lot longer. But if it's a matter of, I remember, were you one of the guys down in Manhattan Beach? No. Okay,
no.
There was a group of guys down in Manhattan Beach that had a real space solar power proposal, and it looked really good. This was about 10 years ago, and I don't know whatever happened to it. But we've actually made a lot of progress since then. So if we could, I don't know if you need a charter. I mean, all you need is incorporation papers and a good idea and get yourself some investors.
Well, it took a charter of ComSat Corporation to create the communications satellite industry that we have today. That's how we did it with ComSat Corporation to do
Yeah, but
the
you know,
same
with the
thing with a power satellite
Yeah,
corporation.
but the difference with the space, with the satellites and the telephones and things like that,
The
you're going
big-
in, yeah, you're going into the system. You can build a space power facility that would be aimed at specific customers, meaning the city of Seattle or something.
No, sir.
That would then invest in a space solar power facility.
Power systems like space power are inherently much more expensive to build those facilities than say a communications satellite. A communications satellite is relatively inexpensive, like CubeSats, for example. But to build a space power system, you're talking about many billions of dollars, which no companies.
Oh, I think you're talking about billions of dollars, but that's what you're talking about when you build a new nuclear energy facility as well. You
Right,
build a new
but-
nuclear plant. I think my guess is you could build a space solar power system that's cheaper than building a new nuclear power plant. I mean, that's just a guess. Listen, we can argue, we can discuss it a little bit later, but thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.